You think cruises are all about cocktails, sunshine, and ocean views, but behind the laughter and music, there are stories the companies never want you to hear. These aren't made up. These are real encounters, pulled from verified testimonies, forums, and Reddit confessions, each one rechecked and retold exactly as survivors described them. From cabins that don't exist, to storms that erase people from memory, these are the nightmares that follow you home. Stay with me till the end. And if you're brave enough, hit subscribe, tap the bell icon, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Welcome to Midnight Outcry, where the ocean keeps its secrets. I never thought stepping onto that ship would change everything I believed about the ocean. It wasn't even my idea. I was just tagging along with friends, trying to escape a rough patch in life. The cruise had been marketed as the voyage of renewal, promising peace, luxury, and the kind of rest I thought I needed. But there was something about that vessel the moment I saw it, like it had been waiting for me. It loomed against the sunset, bigger than I expected, but somehow darker too. Not in color, but in feel. The way the light refused to cling to its windows made it seem less like a vacation liner and more like a floating shadow. I should have turned back then. When I walked up the gangway, a sharp chill hit me, not from the sea breeze. I grew up near the coast. I know that kind of cold. This was different. It slipped under my skin like icy fingers, leaving goosebumps even as the Caribbean heat pressed against my back. A crew member standing nearby smiled too wide, like he was rehearsing it. His lips moved, but for a second, I swear no sound came out. My cabin was on the 10th deck, room 1009, a neat little space with polished wood, a queen bed, and a balcony facing the endless blue. But here's the strange thing. When I looked at the room number on the hallway plaque, it seemed to shimmer, almost bleed around the edges. I blinked, and it was fine again. Just 1009. That night at dinner, I tried to shake it off. My friends were laughing, drinking, snapping selfies. The dining hall was full of clinking glasses and chatter. But I noticed one thing none of them seemed to. A table in the corner, with 3 people seated. Their plates were untouched, their heads slightly bowed. And the longer I stared, the more I realized their skin looked pale, too pale, almost translucent. No one else paid them any attention. I wanted to say something, but before I could, the lights flickered. Just for a second. And in that second, the table was empty. My breath caught. I told myself I was just tired, maybe jet-lagged, maybe the wine was hitting harder than I thought. But I couldn't shake the image of those pale faces. Later, lying in bed, I left the balcony door cracked for air. Around 2 a.m., I woke to a sound, a whisper. At first, I thought it was the wind, but no. These were words. Clear, low, and close, another one. My eyes shot open. I sat up, scanning the dark room. The whisper was gone, but the balcony curtains swayed inward like something had just slipped past it. I tried to laugh it off in the morning, told myself I'd been dreaming, but as I made my way to breakfast, I noticed something carved into the hallway wall outside my cabin. Small, shallow letters, like scratched with a nail. 1009 is next. You know, sometimes when I think back, I wonder why I didn't just get off at the first port. Maybe I wanted to prove I wasn't scared, or maybe the ship didn't want me to leave. Either way, by then, I was already caught in its story. And hey, before I get deeper into what happened, if you're the kind of person who believes some stories are just stories, you might want to hit that subscribe button right now, because this one isn't. This one followed me home. The second day should have been ordinary. Buffet breakfast, sunburned tourists lounging by the pool, the sound of steel drums echoing from the deck. Everything looked normal, but I couldn't stop noticing the wrong details, like the way the staff avoided eye contact whenever I asked questions, or how every time I passed a reflective surface, mirrors in the hallway, polished brass railings, I thought I caught someone standing just behind me, a shape, a face. Gone the second I turned my head, At lunch, one of my friends, Marcus, leaned over the table and laughed. "You look like you didn't sleep, man. Cabin too noisy?" His words seemed casual, but something about his tone, it was almost rehearsed. I stared at him. His eyes didn't quite match his smile. They looked tired or borrowed. I brushed it off and went exploring the upper decks alone. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The ship map. You know those big glossy diagrams they post at every stairwell? They're supposed to help you find your way around. But when I looked at the one on deck 10, my cabin wasn't there. Room 1009 simply didn't exist. I rubbed my eyes, leaned in closer, traced the floor plan with my finger. Nope. It jumped from 1008 straight to 1010. A blank wall where my cabin should be. My chest tightened. I checked another map on the opposite side of the ship, same thing. No 1009. I don't know what made me do it, but I pulled out my phone and snapped a picture of the map. Just as I did, a shadow slid across the glass of the map case. I whipped around. No one was behind me. The hallway stretched empty in both directions. That night, I locked my balcony door. Double-checked it. Triple-checked it. Still, around 3 a.m., I woke to the sound of water dripping. Not from the bathroom, not from the sink, from the ceiling. I turned on the light and froze. A dark patch was spreading above the bed, dripping salt water onto the sheets. My sheets. And with it came the whisper again, this time louder, clearer. "Another offering already?" My body went cold. The dripping stopped as suddenly as it had started. The ceiling was dry again. No water, no stain, just silence. I wanted to run to my friends' cabins, but something deep inside told me not to open that door. Like if I stepped into the hallway at that moment, something would be waiting. So I stayed frozen in bed until the sun rose. By morning, my friends insisted on dragging me to shore when the ship docked at its first port. They laughed, drank cocktails, took pictures with strangers on the beach. I tried to relax, but I couldn't stop thinking, what happens if I don't come back on board? And that's when I noticed something chilling. Every time I drifted away from my group, one of the crew appeared nearby, watching, not casually, closely, like they were making sure I wouldn't disappear into the city, like they were waiting for me to reboard. When we finally headed back toward the ship, I hesitated at the gangway. The same too-wide smile crew member from day one was standing there, ushering passengers inside. His lips stretched unnaturally as he whispered under his breath, just loud enough for me to hear, "Welcome back, 1009. Tell me, if you saw that, would you have turned back? Or would you have stepped onto the ship like I did? Because that choice sealed everything that came next." The moment my foot touched the ship's gangway, I swear the air felt heavier, like I was stepping back into a sealed vault. The laughter and music from shore melted away, replaced with that low, constant hum the ship always carried. It wasn't just machinery. It was like the ship itself was breathing. When we got back to our floor, something subtle had changed. The hall seemed longer, the carpeting darker. Even the light bulbs buzzed faintly, casting shadows that stretched just a little too far. My friends went straight into their cabins without a word, doors clicking shut one by one. I lingered outside mine, staring at the numbers. 1008. 10. And then, a door that should not have been there. The polished brass plaque read 1009. My cabin. I swear to you, earlier that day it didn't exist on any map. Yet here it was, as ordinary as any other door. I reached for the handle, but before I touched it, I noticed something that sent a chill down my arms. The door was wet. My fingers hovered inches above the metal, droplets sliding down as if the other side was underwater. I jerked my hand back. Behind me, the hallway was empty, but it didn't feel empty. I forced myself to go inside, and just like before, everything looked normal. Bed made, curtains closed, bathroom spotless. I laughed nervously at myself, but when I turned toward the mirror, my laugh died in my throat. My reflection was delayed. It moved, but a second late. And worse, Its mouth was still smiling long after mine had gone still. I stumbled back, knocking over the chair by the desk. The reflection froze, staring at me. Then, slowly, so slowly, lifted its hand and pressed it against the inside of the glass. That night, I hardly slept. Every sound in the hallway felt like it was just outside my door. Knocks that weren't really knocks. Footsteps stopping right at my cabin. Once, I thought I heard someone breathing just beyond the doorframe. The next morning, I couldn't find Marcus or any of my friends. I checked their cabins. Empty, beds untouched. The crew at reception gave me polite smiles, insisted those names weren't on the passenger list. My head spun. We'd checked in together, we'd eaten meals together. I wasn't imagining this. Panicked, I asked to see the manifest. The receptionist's smile never faltered. "I'm afraid that information isn't available, sir." Her eyes flicked to the security guard standing a few feet away, watching, always watching. I backed away, heart pounding, and nearly collided with the same wide-smile crew member I'd seen at the gangway. He leaned close, voice low enough for only me to hear. "You shouldn't be in 1009. Nobody should." Then he walked off, smile unbroken, as if nothing had happened. That's when it clicked. They weren't just hiding my cabin from the maps. They were hiding me. And whatever was inside this room, it wasn't just a mistake in the design of the ship. It was something alive. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, the whole ship felt like it was holding its breath. Laughter from the bars had thinned. Music sounded muffled, distant, like it came through water. And everywhere I went, no one would meet my eyes. I tried again to find my friends. Marcus, Olivia, the whole group. Their cabins were still pristine. No luggage, no clothes, no trace they'd ever stepped foot inside. I cornered a housekeeper in the hallway, desperate, asking if she'd seen them. She froze, glanced nervously at my door, then whispered one sentence that chilled me to the bone. They were taken back to the room. I asked what she meant, but she shoved her cart forward and hurried away, muttering prayers under her breath. That night I locked myself inside 1009. The mirror loomed in the dark, faintly glowing like it had its own source of light. My reflection was waiting, standing still, even though I was pacing the floor. Then it smiled, wide, too wide, before raising its finger to its lips in a shh. The air pressure in the room dropped. My ears popped. The door rattled violently, as if something was pounding from the other side trying to get in, or maybe trying to get out. I backed into the corner when I noticed the carpet near the bed rippling like something was moving underneath it. Then, without warning, a soaking wet hand pushed through the fabric and slammed against the floor. Another followed. And then I saw Marcus. He crawled halfway out from beneath the bed, drenched, skin pale, eyes wide open but lifeless. His lips moved, struggling to form words, before finally forcing them out. "It keeps us here." I screamed his name, but the hand dragged him back under in one violent motion, leaving nothing but a wet stain spreading across the carpet. The mirror flickered, and for the briefest moment I saw all of my friends behind the glass, banging against it, mouths open in silent screams. That's when I understood. Cabin 1009 wasn't a room. It was a doorway. The ship wasn't just a ship. It was a feeding ground. Passengers went missing, and the crew pretended they never existed. But in reality, they were swallowed into this place, this in-between dimension that the cabin led to. I slammed the curtains open, thinking maybe I could get someone's attention outside. But instead of the ocean, I saw only black water pressing against the glass, like the ship was submerged deep below. And in that water, faces. Pressed against the window, watching me, waiting. The lights flickered, then went out completely. In the pitch dark, the mirror whispered, not in one voice, but in many. My friends, strangers, all layered over one another. "Stay with us. You belong here now." I don't remember how I got out. Maybe I never did. I woke up in the ship's lounge, slumped over a table, with no memory of walking there. The crew carried on like nothing had happened. Guests laughed, clinked glasses, and swayed to the music. The world looked normal again. For a brief second, I thought it had all been some nightmare. But then I noticed my hands. My skin was damp, wrinkled, like I'd been submerged in water for hours. Droplets slid from my sleeves, soaking the carpet beneath me. Nobody else seemed to notice. I staggered to the bar, desperate for some kind of grounding. The bartender smiled politely and asked, "Cabin number?" I froze. My throat went dry. Before I could answer, he leaned closer, his voice dropping. "Don't fight it. Nobody ever leaves 1009. The lights flickered above us. A reflection in the glass behind the bar caught my eye. I wasn't sitting there. Something else was. My mirror self was staring at me, lips curling into that same impossible grin, eyes black as ink. It raised its hand and tapped on the inside of the glass. Tap, tap, tap. The sound vibrated deep in my skull. I stumbled back, knocking over a chair, and people finally looked at me, but their faces blurred, smearing into watery streaks. One by one, their features melted until they became identical. All of them wore my face. I ran. I don't even know where, because the hallways stretched endlessly. Every turn led me back to cabin 1009, its door always waiting, its knob always dripping, and I swear, I can still hear Marcus whispering behind it. "It keeps us here. Now it keeps you too." If you're listening to this, if you're hearing my voice, that means the story didn't stay locked in 1009. It slipped through, maybe into your screen, maybe into your room. So when you look in the mirror tonight, don't stare too long, because if it smiles back at you first, you'll know the door has already opened. And you'll never be able to close it again. Story 2. The strangest thing about this cruise, it wasn't the ocean stretching out forever. It wasn't even the storm warnings that passengers whispered about over dinner. No, what stuck with me most was the empty cabin. Cabin 742. It wasn't listed on the passenger map, it wasn't on the brochures. And yet, late at night, you could feel the ship's floor tremble slightly, as if something moved behind its door. Our new protagonist, Rachel, noticed it on her second day aboard. She was a travel blogger from Oregon, used to chasing sunsets and quirky Airbnbs, not shadows in the middle of the sea. But that door, paint peeling, number scratched, frame warped like it had been wet too many times, called to her every time she walked down the hall. At first, she thought it was just her imagination, but then she saw the Do Not Disturb sign hanging crooked from its knob. The problem? The tag wasn't like the others. Old, yellowed, with letters almost faded away. She couldn't shake it. And then came the sound. A low, steady thumping. Not loud, but rhythmic, like someone knocking from inside. She asked a crew member about the cabin. He froze. His cheerful smile stiffened, and he mumbled, "No such room, ma'am," before hurrying away. That night, Rachel set up her camera in the hallway, lens pointed at 742. She wanted proof. Just a little footage for her blog. Something mysterious, something to keep her viewers hooked. But when she checked the playback the next morning, her blood ran cold. The door was gone. On the recording, there was nothing but smooth, seamless wall. Yet as she sat there staring at her laptop, Rachel could hear it. That same steady thump, now behind her. The next morning on the cruise was supposed to feel fresh, bright, alive with the sounds of breakfast chatter and clinking cutlery. But for Ethan, it was like waking up inside someone else's nightmare. His reflection in the small cabin mirror looked pale, his eyes rimmed with sleeplessness. He hadn't shaken off what he heard last night, the slow, dragging footsteps outside his door, the whisper that didn't sound like it came from just one mouth, but from several layered voices. He tried to convince himself it was exhaustion, maybe even jet lag, but then his phone vibrated with a message from Maya, greater than, "Did you hear anything last night? I swear someone walked past my cabin around 2 a.m., but when I checked, the hallway was empty." Ethan's stomach dropped. That hallway, that exact time. He hadn't told her anything yet. Later that day, the two met on the deck, hiding behind sunglasses and coffee cups, trying to look casual, but both glancing around, as if expecting someone to overhear. I didn't just hear footsteps, Ethan said finally, lowering his voice. I heard whispering too, like they knew my name. Maya froze, her cup hovering midair. Ethan, don't joke like that. I'm not. And right then, as if on cue, a crew member passed them with a polite smile, but his eyes lingered for a second too long. Ethan caught it. Maya did too. The silence between them grew heavier. Minihook, something about the staff on the ship felt off, like they weren't just working, they were watching. That evening, Ethan found a folded piece of paper slid under his cabin door. At first glance, it looked like part of the daily activity newsletter the crews handed out. But in the middle, scrawled in jagged handwriting, were the words, "Don't stay in your cabin tonight. 2:45 a.m. He rushed down the hall to Maya's cabin and showed her. Her hands shook as she held the paper. This isn't funny anymore. Who even knows our cabins? The staff, obviously, Ethan said. But why warn me? Why that time? Maya's answer was a whisper. Maybe because that's when something happens. That night, Ethan didn't stay in his cabin, neither did Maya. Instead, they sat quietly in the library lounge on the far end of the ship, pretending to read but both listening for every creak, every shift of the vessel. At exactly 2:45 a.m., the ship's lights flickered. For 3 long seconds, the crews felt swallowed by darkness. When the lights returned, Ethan's heart almost stopped. Because right across from them, sitting at a table, was a man neither had seen board. His clothes looked out of place, older, faded, as if he belonged to another decade. And when his eyes met Ethan's, it was like staring into glassy pools that reflected nothing back. Maya gripped Ethan's wrist so hard it hurt. "Tell me you see him too," she whispered. But Ethan couldn't answer. The man had just smiled at him, like he'd been waiting. The man didn't move. He sat perfectly still, that faint smile etched across his face as though he had all the time in the world. Ethan forced himself to look away, his heart racing, but curiosity pulled his gaze back, and the chair was empty. No footsteps, no sound of retreat. Just gone. Maya's nails dug into his arm. Where did he go? Ethan stood quickly, scanning the lounge. The other passengers were dozing, buried in books or sipping nightcaps. None of them seemed to notice that a stranger had just vanished in front of their eyes. Minihook. It was as if this ship carried passengers who didn't exist. Ghosts, hidden in plain sight. They left the lounge, deciding silence was safer than questioning what they'd seen. Back in the hallway, the walls felt narrower, the lights dimmer than usual. Ethan swore he could hear faint humming, like a lullaby being sung through the metal of the ship itself. Maya whispered, "I can't stay another night here. We need answers. We need to talk to someone who knows more." "Like who?" Ethan asked. "The crew? They're hiding something." And just then, a voice came from behind them. "You're right." They spun around. It was the same crew member who had passed them on deck earlier, the one who'd looked at them for a moment too long. His name tag read, Luis. Maya stiffened. "Were you following us?" Luis shook his head. His eyes darted up and down the hall before he leaned in, speaking so softly it was almost inaudible. "You need to understand. This ship doesn't sail empty. There are others here. You saw one tonight, didn't you?" Neither Ethan nor Maya responded, but their silence said everything. Luis nodded. "I shouldn't even be talking to you. But if you want to live through this cruise, don't be in your cabin at 2:45. Ever." Ethan's voice cracked. "Why 2:45? Luis's face darkened. "That's when the ship remembers." He straightened suddenly, his expression snapping back to a professional mask. Another staff member turned the corner, and without another word, Luis walked away, as if nothing had happened. Maya grabbed Ethan's hand, pulling him into her cabin. "This is insane. The ship remembers? What does that even mean?" Ethan shook his head, pacing. "I don't know, but if he's warning us, then whatever happens at 2:45, it's not just random." Maya stared at the clock on the wall. Midnight. They had less than 3 hours. When 2:45 arrived again, they weren't in their cabins. They were hiding near the stairwell on deck 5, peeking out just enough to see the hallway stretch long and silent. The lights flickered once, twice, then darkness. This time, it wasn't for 3 seconds. It lasted almost a full minute. And in that minute, they both heard it. Dozens of footsteps marching in unison. The sound of doors opening down the corridor, and whispers, overlapping whispers that grew louder and louder until it felt like the voices were inches from their ears. When the lights returned, Ethan's chest froze. Every door down the hallway stood wide open, even though they'd all been shut before. And inside those rooms, he saw figures, passengers in outdated clothes, standing perfectly still, all staring directly at him. Maya's hand clamped over her mouth to stifle a scream. The ship wasn't just carrying the living. Ethan couldn't breathe. Every figure in those open cabins stared with hollow, unblinking eyes. Their faces were pale, drained of warmth, their clothes old-fashioned, dresses and suits from decades ago untouched by time. Maya tugged on his arm. "Ethan, we have to go." But before he could move, one of the figures stepped forward. A woman in a torn evening gown. Her voice echoed, not from her lips, but from everywhere around them. "You're in our place." Minnie Hook. The dead weren't passengers anymore. They were hosts. Ethan yanked Maya's hand and bolted down the hallway. The whispers followed, turning into shouts that rattled through the steel walls of the ship. He risked a glance back. Shadows were spilling out of the cabins, converging into the corridor like a tide of black smoke. They ran down the stairwell, the clang of their shoes echoing, but when they reached deck 4, the hallway didn't look like the ship they knew. The wallpaper was peeling, water dripped from the ceiling, and the air reeked of salt and mildew. It was as though they'd stepped back into a version of the ship that shouldn't exist anymore. Maya's voice cracked. "Ethan, what if we're not in our time anymore?" Before he could respond, Luis appeared again, his uniform disheveled, his face pale with fear. "You didn't listen," he hissed. "I told you to stay out of sight at 2:45. "We weren't in our cabin," Ethan snapped. "We did what you said. What's happening?" Luis's eyes darted nervously behind them, at the shadows spilling down the stairwell. "The ship," he whispered, "isn't just sailing. It's repeating. Every night, it relives the night it sank." Ethan froze. "Sank? What are you talking about? This ship is still here." Luis grabbed his arm so tightly it hurt. "No, it wasn't. Decades ago, this liner went down in a storm. Hundreds died. The company rebuilt it, repainted it, sold the tickets, but you can't repaint over the dead." Maya gasped, her voice trembling. "So those people, they're the ones who never left." The ship groaned as if it agreed. The lights dimmed again. Luis shoved them toward the end of the hall. "You want to survive? Don't let them see you as a replacement. They're always looking to fill the cabins that went empty that night." Ethan's blood turned cold. Replacement. Passengers for the drowned. He and Maya followed Luis through a narrow service passage. The shadows pressed closer, whispering louder, until the words became clear. "Stay. Stay with us. The sea remembers." Luis stopped at a hatch, forcing it open. Wind and rain blasted through. It led outside to a maintenance deck slick with seawater. "Go!" Luis shouted. "Hide until dawn. That's the only way through." But as Ethan and Maya scrambled through the hatch, Ethan looked back and saw Luis being swallowed by the shadows, his scream cut short as the door slammed shut behind them. Out on the deck, the storm howled, rain lashed their faces, and lightning illuminated the impossible sight before them. Another ship, broken and rusted, floating alongside theirs. It was the same ship, only wrecked, half submerged, its nameplate corroded and unreadable. Maya's knees buckled. "Ethan, are we seeing the night it sank?" He couldn't answer. Because on that ghost ship's deck, dozens of figures lined the rails, watching them. And with every flash of lightning, Ethan realized some of those figures weren't from the past. Some wore clothes just like his, passengers who had vanished in recent years. Passengers who had never made it home. Rain hammered down so hard it stung Ethan's skin. He and Maya clung to the slippery railing as the ghost ship loomed closer, the waves tossing both vessels like toys. For one terrifying moment, the two ships seemed to merge, the rusted wreck bleeding into the bright modern cruise liner. Maya's nails dug into Ethan's arm. "Ethan, they're crossing over." The figures from the ghost ship began stepping onto theirs without even touching the water, their feet dragging, their eyes locked onto the living. The storm roared louder, as though the sea itself wanted to pull Ethan and Maya under. Then, over the chaos, a voice called out from behind them. "Ethan!" He spun. Luis stood there, soaked and trembling, though Ethan swore he had just seen him taken by the shadows. His face was pale, lips blue, eyes hollow. "You can't run," Luis said, his voice warped. "This isn't a ship anymore. It's a graveyard that sails." Mini hook. Ethan realized Luis wasn't warning them. He was inviting them. Maya shook her head violently. "No, we're not staying." She pulled Ethan toward the lifeboats, though the deck pitched so violently it felt impossible to stand. Most lifeboats were smashed, their ropes tangled, useless. But one, just one, still hung in place. Lightning split the sky. That was when Ethan saw it. The lifeboat wasn't empty. 3 passengers already sat inside, staring blankly at him. Their skin was gray, water dripping endlessly from their clothes. Passengers who should have been dead. Maya stopped in her tracks, her scream drowned by the thunder. "Ethan, they're waiting for us." The ship groaned again, metal shrieking like something alive. The deck tilted sharply, sending luggage and furniture sliding into the sea. The ghostly passengers pressed closer, whispering in unison, "Take your place. It's your turn." Ethan gripped Maya's hand so tightly it hurt. His mind spun with a single thought. Maybe there was no escape. Maybe that was why so many people had vanished without a trace. He looked at Maya. Her eyes were wide, desperate, clinging to him for an answer. "What do we do?" she whispered. Ethan opened his mouth to reply, and the deck beneath them gave way. They plunged into black water, the freezing sea closing over their heads. Ethan fought upward, breaking the surface, gasping. But Maya was gone. "Maya!" he screamed, thrashing in the waves. Lightning flashed, and he saw her, clutched by pale arms, dragged toward the wrecked ghost ship. Her mouth opened, but instead of a scream, a rush of seawater spilled out. Her eyes met his one last time before the shadows swallowed her. Ethan tried to swim after her, but the storm was merciless. A wave slammed him under, spinning him until he couldn't tell up from down. His lungs burned, his vision blurred. And suddenly, he wasn't in the sea anymore. He was standing in a dry hallway. The familiar cruise ship corridors stretched ahead of him, neat and modern, the storm gone. He staggered forward, dripping wet. Everything was quiet. Too quiet. That was when he saw it, his reflection in a cabin door's glass. His skin pale, his eyes sunken, water streaming endlessly down his face. A dead passenger staring back at him. Mini hook. The ship had chosen its replacement. No one ever saw Ethan or Maya again. The manifest listed them as missing at sea. The company filed its reports. The vacationers carried on. But if you ever step aboard that ship, and you find yourself walking past cabins that feel colder than the rest, listen closely, because sometimes, late at night, the sound of knocking echoes through the hallways, not from inside the rooms, from under the water. Story 3. I still don't know if stepping onto that ship was the biggest mistake of my life, or if I was always meant to end up there. What I saw, what I lived through, it wasn't just horror. It was something that reached inside me and hasn't let go since. My name's Rachel. I'm 29, a freelance photographer from Portland. I'd been saving for months to take a cruise, hoping to build a new portfolio, Sunsets over the ocean, candid passenger shots, maybe even some travel magazine work if I was lucky. I wasn't expecting terror. I wasn't expecting to find myself running through endless corridors that didn't exist on the deck plan. The first few days were perfect. Drinks on the pool deck, live music, the kind of cotton candy sunsets you only get at sea. Everyone was friendly, almost too friendly. Strangers smiled a second too long, like they already knew me. It was the third night when I started noticing the hallway. My cabin was on deck 8, just a few doors from the stairwell. But every night when I came back, the corridor looked different, longer. The lights buzzed faintly, like they were straining against some invisible current. One night, I decided to count the doors, 32 in total. The next evening, when I tried again, there were 36. My cabin number stayed the same, but the layout around it shifted like the ship itself was bending. I told myself it was exhaustion, motion sickness. Maybe I'd had one too many glasses of wine at dinner. But then I saw her, a woman in a faded red dress, barefoot, standing at the far end of the hall. She didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there, pale face half hidden by the flickering light. When I blinked, she was gone. By the fourth night, I wasn't sure if I was losing my mind or walking into someone else's. And that's when I found the door that wasn't supposed to exist. The door was at the very end of the corridor, tucked into a corner that wasn't there during the day. Metal, painted the same beige as the walls, but older, its handle tarnished, cold to the touch. No number, no key card slot, just waiting. I hesitated, heart pounding in my throat. A rational voice inside me whispered, "Walk away, go back to your cabin." But something else pulled me closer, like the ship itself wanted me to open it. When I pressed the handle, it gave way too easily. The air that hit me was icy, sharp with salt and something faintly metallic, like rust. The room beyond was nothing like a cabin. It looked more like storage, bare walls, low ceiling, a single flickering bulb swinging from a chain, and in the middle, a chair. Not just any chair. A steel chair bolted to the floor, straps hanging loose from the armrests. Around it were scratches carved deep into the metal, like someone had tried to claw their way free. My stomach knotted. Then I heard it. A whisper. Not in my head. Not imagination. A woman's voice, low and shaking, right behind me. Greater than, "Don't sit down." I spun around. The woman in the red dress was there again, closer than before. I could finally see her face. Sunken eyes, lips cracked as if she hadn't spoken in years. She raised her hand, pointing to the chair. Greater than, "That's how they keep us here." And then, as suddenly as she appeared, the lights flickered out. Darkness swallowed the room, and I felt the faintest brush of cold fingers against my arm. When the bulb sputtered back to life, the chair was empty, but the straps were buckled closed, tied as if someone invisible had just been bound to it. I ran, but the corridor I spilled into wasn't the same one I'd entered from. It twisted, bent, doors multiplying like a maze designed to trap me. Every direction looked the same, yet every step carried the smell of seawater and rust deeper into my lungs. And then I heard more voices. Not one, but dozens, whispering in unison. The whispers surrounded Rachel, crawling through the walls like a draft. She pressed her back to the cold metal, every hair on her body prickling. At first, the words were impossible to catch, like water slipping between her fingers. Then they grew sharper. Greater than, "Stay with us." Greater than, "Sit in the chair." Greater than, "We remember you." Her breath hitched. Remember her? She'd never been here before. Or had she? A sudden slam echoed behind her, the sound of a heavy door closing. She jolted forward, stumbling through the endless hallway until another door appeared, this one slightly ajar, glowing faintly with warm, amber light. Against her better judgment, she pushed it open. Inside was no cabin, no storage room. It was a lounge, or at least that's what it wanted her to think. Velvet chairs arranged in a circle, tables set with untouched glasses of wine, chandeliers dimly swaying above, and in every seat, people. They looked normal at first, Passengers dressed in cruise attire, but their faces too pale, their smiles stretched too wide. Their eyes followed her in perfect unison. One of them, a man in a captain's uniform, leaned forward, voice soft but filled with authority, greater than, "We've been waiting for you, Rachel. It's your turn." The others nodded, their voices layering into a chant, greater than, "Your turn, your turn, your turn." Rachel stumbled back toward the door, but it had already vanished, replaced by seamless metal wall. Her pulse roared in her ears. She shouted, desperate, "What do you want from me?" The captain's grin deepened. He raised a trembling hand and pointed to the center of the lounge, where, impossibly, the steel chair had appeared again, bolted to the floor. This time, it wasn't empty. A shape sat in it, bound tightly by the straps, and as Rachel's eyes adjusted, her stomach dropped. It was her own body, slumped, lips blue, eyes wide with terror. The whispers rose into a chorus, shaking the room. Greater than, "Sit down." Rachel's knees buckled. She pressed her hands over her face, peeking through her fingers, but the sight didn't vanish. That figure, herself, remained in the chair. Same clothes, same trembling lip, same hair, tangled with sweat. She whispered, "No, that's not me. That can't be me." The captain tilted his head, movements jerky, like a puppet on strings. "Greater than, it's always been you. It always will be you." The others leaned closer, every passenger breathing in sync, their lungs rattling as though they'd drowned long ago. Rachel backed into the wall, her palms flattened against the cold surface, searching desperately for a door seam, a handle, anything. Nothing. The metal seemed alive, flexing with each thud of her heartbeat. The strapped version of herself in the chair suddenly blinked. The lips moved, cracked and pale. Greater than, "Please, help me." Her own voice. Rachel's stomach twisted. She wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. The circle of pale passengers rose slowly to their feet. Their movements were silent. No footsteps, no rustle of clothing, just a wave of bodies closing in. One passenger, a woman with stringy hair dripping water onto the carpet, reached out a hand. The chair doesn't hurt, not after the first time. The captain stepped closer, extending his arm toward Rachel as though inviting her to take it. Greater than, "Sit. Take your place. The ship will sail smoother once it has you." The lounge seemed to shrink, the chandeliers lowering, the air pressing down until her lungs fought for each breath. The whispers were deafening now, all chanting, demanding, greater than, "Your turn, your turn, your turn." Rachel's eyes darted between the chair, her doppelganger's terrified face, and the impossible crowd. Her throat burned as she screamed, "Why me?" The captain leaned so close she could feel the chill radiating off him. Greater than, because you boarded, because you stayed, because the ship chose you. The doppelganger in the chair thrashed violently, trying to break free, but the straps held tight. And Rachel realized with a gut-sinking clarity, if she didn't take that place, her reflection would remain trapped forever. And maybe she already had. Her fingers trembled as the circle of figures pressed closer, their faces inches from hers, their cold breath washing over her skin. The ship groaned deep below as though impatient. Rachel had seconds to decide. Rachel's back pressed so hard into the wall she thought her bones would snap. The chanting wrapped around her like chains, greater than, "Your turn, your turn, your turn." The captain's hand hovered inches from her cheek. His skin was pale, bloated, like something dredged from the ocean floor. Behind him, the passengers closed the circle tighter, their empty eyes glowing faintly, with the reflection of the chandelier's last, flickering light. Her double in the chair writhed harder now, head whipping side to side, straps cutting deeper into skin. Rachel heard the scream, muffled, guttural, but she couldn't tell if it was coming from the chair or from inside her own skull. She pressed her palms over her ears. "This isn't real. This isn't real." The captain smiled with cracked teeth. "Greater than, it's more real than anything you've ever known." And then the chandelier snapped, glass raining down like frozen fire. In that second of chaos, Rachel made her choice. Instead of moving toward the chair, she lunged at it, straight at her doppelganger. Her body collided with the figure, but there was no impact, no flesh, no weight. She passed through her own double, a shock of ice ripping through every vein. When she spun around, the chair was empty. The straps swung loose. The passengers froze, whisper cut short. The captain's smile faltered. Rachel staggered backward, gasping, her breath misting in the air. "I'm not taking my place. I won't." For the first time, the ship groaned, not in hunger, but in protest. The walls shuddered, the carpet rippled like water, and the chandeliers above blew out all at once, plunging the lounge into darkness. The passengers shrieked in unison, a sound that wasn't human, like wind tearing through a cavern, mixed with thousands of drowning voices. They collapsed into the floor, melting into shadows that slithered away under the door seams. The captain reached for her again, but his form was unraveling, his uniform fraying into tatters of smoke, greater than, "You can't leave. No one leaves." His hand dissolved before it could touch her. Rachel turned and, this time, the wall behind her gave way. A door, carved from the dark itself, creaked open. She didn't think. She ran, through the door, through the black, until she burst onto the deck of the ship. Cold ocean wind slammed into her, salt stinging her lungs, and the ship was empty. Every deck chair overturned, every light flickering out. The horizon stretched endless, but no other vessels, no shore. Just her, and the creaking skeleton of a ship that didn't want her anymore. Rachel collapsed to her knees. For the first time, silence. No whispers, no chanting. But as she looked down into the rolling water, her heart stopped. Her reflection stared back, strapped into the chair, mouth open in a silent scream, eyes wide and pleading. And the ocean swallowed the image whole. Rachel blinked, and the deck was empty again. But somewhere deep in her chest, she felt it. The ship wasn't finished with her. It had only postponed. Story 4. If you've ever booked a cruise thinking it's the perfect mix of relaxation and adventure, you probably never considered what might be lurking behind those glossy brochures. Tonight's encounter comes from Ethan, a 28-year-old from Denver, whose first big cruise vacation turned into a nightmare that still haunts him whenever he hears the sound of waves. It was early summer when Ethan boarded the Celestial Voyager, a ship promising endless buffets, glowing pool parties, and breathtaking midnight views. He was traveling solo, hoping the trip would clear his head after a rough breakup. At first, everything went exactly as advertised. The ocean spread out like an endless painting, the drinks flowed, and the music carried through the night air. But Ethan noticed something off on his second evening. While exploring the upper decks, he wandered into a hallway that didn't appear on the map or the digital guide. The lighting was dimmer, the walls narrower, and the carpet smelled faintly of mold, as though this corridor hadn't been walked in years. He shrugged it off, figuring he had stumbled into a staff-only area, until he saw a door slightly ajar. From inside came the faintest sound. Not music, not footsteps, but a cry. A drawn-out, muffled sob that seemed to rattle with salt water. Ethan froze. His first thought was maybe someone was seasick, locked in their cabin. But the longer he listened, the more it sounded wrong, like the voice of someone calling out from underwater. He pushed the door open. The room inside was pitch black, no cabin light, no window glow, just a chill that wrapped around him. He pulled out his phone, flashlight beam cutting across the small cabin. That's when he saw it. The mirror on the far wall was fogged over, as though someone had just taken a hot shower. But there was no bathroom attached, no source of steam, and written across the glass in dripping streaks were the words, "Do not sleep in this room." Ethan's chest tightened. His first instinct was to back out quietly, to pretend he hadn't seen it. But before he could move, something shifted in the reflection. It wasn't him. The figure in the glass was taller, shoulders bent, face blurred by condensation. And it was standing behind him. Ethan spun around so fast his shoulders smacked against the doorframe. The cabin was empty. No figure, no shadow, just the stale smell of mildew and salt that clung to the walls. He whipped his flashlight back toward the mirror. The foggy glass still shimmered, words dripping, the warning staring at him like a threat carved into stone. His pulse thudded in his ears. Was it the reflection of someone who had been here before, or something that wasn't supposed to be here at all? He wanted to leave right then, but something stopped him. Curiosity, or maybe that human instinct that makes you lean closer to danger just to be sure it's real. As he edged deeper into the room, the air grew colder, heavy, almost damp, like the atmosphere of a basement. His phone flashlight flickered once, and for a split second, the mirror rippled. The reflection bent like water disturbed by a stone. That's when Ethan heard it again. The cry, louder this time, not muffled, not distant, but inside the room. "Help me." The voice was female, strained, bubbling with liquid. Ethan's throat tightened. He whispered into the empty air, "Hello, are you okay?" No reply. He stepped closer to the mirror, raising the light. His reflection swam back into view, distorted and stretched, like he was staring into a pool of deep water instead of polished glass. His own eyes looked panicked, too wide, his mouth slightly parted. But then another face surfaced beside his, pale, gaunt, eyes black like bottomless pits, lips moving soundlessly, forming the same words written on the glass. "Do not sleep in this room." Ethan stumbled back, his heel catching the edge of the carpet. His shoulders slammed the doorframe again, this time hard enough to leave a bruise. He dropped his phone, the beam skittering across the floor before going dark. Panic surged. He scrambled for the handle. The door wouldn't budge. No matter how hard he yanked, it was as if someone was holding it shut from the other side. Then the mirror began to crack. Thin spiderweb fractures spread across the glass, widening, deepening, until black water began seeping out, dripping onto the floor. Each drop hit the carpet with a hiss, like acid burning through fabric. Ethan shouted, slamming his shoulder against the door. This time it burst open with a force that sent him sprawling into the dim hallway. The door swung shut behind him with a deafening slam. When he turned back, breath heaving, the door was gone. The wall was smooth. No room, no number, nothing. Ethan staggered down the corridor, chest heaving, the echo of that slammed door rattling inside his skull. His fingertips brushed the wall where the room had been seconds ago. Flat, seamless, cold metal. He muttered to himself, No, I was just in there. I saw it. I know, I saw it." But as he turned, the hallway itself felt wrong. The lights above flickered with a faint, almost deliberate rhythm. 3 blinks, pause, 2 blinks, pause. Like some sort of coded signal. The air was heavier here, different from the rest of the ship, and he noticed that the hum of the engines wasn't reaching this section. It was too quiet. He pulled his phone out, hoping the flashlight would work again, but the screen stayed black. Dead. His heart sank. That's when he heard footsteps. Not behind him. Ahead. Somewhere down the long stretch of hallway. A steady pace, bare feet slapping the floor, coming closer. He froze, pressing himself against the wall, straining his eyes. Out of the dark, a figure emerged. A woman in a soaked white dress, hair plastered against her face, water dripping from her sleeves. She walked slowly, head tilted as though she were listening to something Ethan couldn't hear. Ethan whispered, "Hey, do you need help?" Her head snapped up at once. Her eyes locked on his empty sockets, like the sea had hollowed them out. Ethan stumbled backward. His shoe caught on the uneven carpet seam, and he almost fell. The woman's mouth opened impossibly wide, and from the dark pit of her throat came that same cry he had heard in the room, a gurgling, drowned plea. "Help me!" The lights above buzzed violently, then cut out, plunging the corridor into total blackness. Ethan couldn't even see his own hand. only the sound of her wet footsteps rushing toward him. He bolted, heart hammering, lungs burning. He ran blindly through the dark, hands scraping the walls to guide him. He didn't know if he was going deeper into the ship or back towards safety. All he knew was that if he stopped, she'd be right on him. And then, out of nowhere, the lights returned. He was no longer in the lower corridor. He was standing in the middle of the ship's main atrium, surrounded by passengers laughing, drinking, dancing to live music. People glanced at him, frowning at his sweat-soaked shirt, his panicked eyes. But no one seemed to have seen what chased him. No one smelled the brine dripping from his clothes. For a moment, Ethan thought he had imagined it all. Maybe he'd had some sort of breakdown. But when he glanced down at his shoes, his stomach dropped. The carpet beneath him was wet. Each of his footprints left a dark stain behind, and alongside them was a second trail. Bare, dripping footprints leading right up next to his. And they didn't stop. They circled him. Ethan's throat went dry as he looked at the floor. The footprints were fresh, glistening under the atrium lights, weaving in a slow, deliberate circle around him. Nobody else reacted. Passengers danced over them. Servers carried trays right through them. It was like he was the only one who could see it. A string of violins swelled from the live band, masking the thud of his heart. He whispered under his breath, "No, this can't be real." Then he felt it. Cold fingertips brushing the back of his neck. He spun, arms flailing, but there was nothing. Just the smiling faces of strangers clinking glasses. The circle of wet footprints was closing in, shrinking around him. Ethan staggered backward, bumping into a waiter, nearly knocking over the tray of champagne. "Sir, are you all right?" the waiter asked, eyebrows knitting in confusion. Ethan tried to answer, but a rush of water filled his ears, drowning out the music. He looked past the waiter's shoulder and froze. By the glass elevator, reflected in its mirrored surface, the woman in the soaked dress was standing perfectly still. Only in the reflection, not in reality. She lifted one hand and pointed straight at him. Ethan bolted again. He didn't care about the stares, the laughter that followed him, or the fact that he looked insane. He pushed through crowds, raced past the casino, and stumbled into a quieter section of the ship. He pressed his back against the wall, chest heaving. He needed answers. If he didn't find out what that room was, or why she was following him, he knew he wasn't going to last another night. That's when his eyes landed on a small, overlooked detail, a framed map of the ship bolted to the wall. He ran his fingers over it, scanning for the layout of the lower deck. There it was, Corridor B, the one he had just been in. But when his eyes followed the line of numbered rooms, his stomach turned to ice. Cabin 303, Cabin 304, Cabin 305. Then, nothing. No Cabin 306. It didn't exist. And yet he had been inside it. Ethan whispered, "What the hell are you?" His voice cracked. Somewhere behind him, down the hall, came the sound of dripping water. Slow, deliberate, closer with each drop. The dripping water grew louder, echoing down the empty corridor like a countdown. Ethan forced himself forward, eyes darting between the map and the hallway stretching into darkness. His pulse throbbed in his ears. The number 306 didn't exist on the map, yet he had stood inside that room, felt the carpet beneath his shoes, touched the door handle, smelled the salt rot inside. He followed the sound. Each drip seemed to fall closer than the last, as though the hallway itself was bending to pull him in. Lights overhead flickered, one by one, plunging sections into shadow as he passed. Then he reached it. Cabin 306. The door was there, just as before, plain and unremarkable. A number stenciled neatly on the brass plaque. His breath caught. The dripping sound stopped the second he reached out his hand. He hesitated, trembling, and then the door opened from the inside. A rush of air struck him in the face, damp and heavy, like the breath of the ocean. Standing in the doorway was the woman in the soaked dress. Her eyes were sunken black, her lips cracked and pale. She didn't speak, only tilted her head and stepped back, inviting him in. Every instinct screamed at Ethan to run. but his body betrayed him. His feet moved forward as if pulled by unseen hands. The door closed behind him with a dull, final thud. Inside, the cabin was wrong. It wasn't a room at all. The walls dissolved into endless black water, stretching out beneath a faint moonlight. The floor beneath him was a thin, floating dock swaying gently on invisible waves. The woman stood at the edge, staring into the void. Then she turned slowly and whispered, "Another offering." Before Ethan could react, the dock lurched violently. He stumbled, catching himself on his knees. But when he looked up, she was gone. The water rippled. Hands broke the surface, dozens, pale and bloated, reaching, clawing toward him. Faces emerged. Faces of passengers he had seen aboard the cruise, laughing at dinner, sipping cocktails, chatting by the pool. Their mouths opened in unison, spilling out the same whisper, "Stay with us." Ethan screamed, scrambling backward, but the dock was shrinking. The water rose, swallowing the edges. The hands latched onto his ankles, his wrists pulling him down. He fought, clawed at the air, but his body slipped beneath the surface. Darkness closed over him. When he woke, he was lying in his cabin bed. Morning sunlight poured through the porthole. For one breathless second, he thought it had been a nightmare. Then he glanced at his wrist. A cabin key dangled loosely from a wet, rusted chain, the number engraved into it, 306. The cruise liner the Celine docked at Miami 2 days later. Hundreds of passengers disembarked with smiles, luggage in hand, waving goodbye. No one mentioned Ethan. No one remembered he had ever boarded. But cabin 306 waited. Do you think Ethan was truly taken by the ship? Or was cabin 306 just a hallucination of a man unraveling at sea? Story 5. The first time Jessica noticed him, she was standing at the ship's rail, watching the sun sink into the Atlantic. He wasn't remarkable at first glance. Just a man in a gray coat, hands clasped loosely in front of him, eyes fixed on the horizon. But what unnerved her wasn't his presence. It was that no one else seemed to see him. Every time she tried to follow his line of sight, she felt that strange tug in her stomach, like a drop in an elevator. It wasn't seasickness. Jessica knew her own body well enough. No, this was something else. Something colder. She shook it off, told herself she was being silly, and retreated inside to the lounge where her best friend, Carly, was laughing with 2 strangers over cocktails. Jessica forced a smile, slid into the booth, and let the chatter pull her back toward normal. But as the night wore on, she kept glancing toward the glass doors that led to the deck, and every time she caught the faintest outline of that gray coat outside. By the second day of the cruise, Jessica wasn't just unsettled, she was obsessed. She asked around subtly, describing the man's sharp cheekbones, the way he seemed rooted to the spot at the rail. Crew members shrugged. Passengers shook their heads. Even Carly rolled her eyes. "You've been reading too many ghost stories," she teased. But then came the moment Jessica couldn't explain. Early morning, while most were still sleeping, she crept back to the deck to see if the man was there. He was. Only this time, she saw him lean forward, over the edge of the railing, as though peering into the black water below. Jessica gasped, taking a step closer, and he turned. His eyes weren't just sad, they were hollow, deep, like the sea itself had carved them out. And Jessica swore she heard him whisper, not in her ears, but inside her head, "You shouldn't have come." Jessica stumbled backward, her breath caught in her throat. The whisper hadn't been real, couldn't have been real. Just the wind off the water, she told herself. Just exhaustion. But the way his lips hadn't moved, the way his gaze burrowed into her, gnawed at her sanity. She fled the deck, heart pounding, and didn't stop until she was back in her cabin. Carly was still asleep, snoring softly, oblivious. Jessica pressed her back to the door, trying to quiet the hammering in her chest. She told herself she'd dreamed it. She told herself she'd imagined everything. But the salty chill clinging to her skin argued otherwise. That night, Jessica made a decision she would avoid the outer decks. No railings, no sea breezes, no chance of running into that figure. For a while, it worked. She kept to the restaurants, the casino, the theater. She laughed when Carly teased her for acting like a hermit. But avoidance has a way of sharpening fear instead of dulling it. On the third night, while walking back to their cabin after a late show, Jessica froze. The ship's hallway stretched before her, carpet patterned in swirls of blue and gold, the fluorescent lights humming softly above. And halfway down, she saw him. Gray coat, hands folded, staring straight at her. Her skin prickled, her breath hitched. She blinked, and he was gone. Jessica ran the last stretch to the cabin, fumbling with the keycard, nearly waking Carly as she collapsed into bed. She didn't sleep. By the fourth day, the line between imagination and reality blurred entirely. She caught his reflection in mirrors, in windows, even in the glossy surface of her untouched wine glass. Always still, always silent, always watching. Finally, Jessica snapped. She cornered a young bartender she'd spoken to before, desperate for validation. "Do you ever see passengers who don't quite belong?" she asked, voice shaking. The bartender hesitated, his eyes flicking toward the deck before settling back on her. "You should probably just stay away from the railings at night," he muttered, lowering his voice. "That's all I can say." Jessica's blood ran cold. The next night, she woke to the sound of waves crashing harder than usual. She glanced at Carly's empty bed. Panic surged. Carly wasn't there. And faintly, through the hum of the ship, Jessica swore she heard it, the whisper, again. "Come closer!" Jessica bolted upright, her heart slamming in her chest. Carly's bed was empty, the sheets cool to the touch. Panic surged like a tidal wave. She sprinted into the corridor, the patterned carpet blurring under her feet. The ship felt different, hollow, echoing, as though every sound had been swallowed by the sea. "Carly," she shouted, voice cracking. No answer. Then she heard it, faint, drawn out, almost playful, "Come closer." The whisper floated down the hallway, tugging her forward. Jessica ran, turning corner after corner until the lights above dimmed and the hallway ended at a heavy door marked "Crew Only." Her instincts screamed not to, but fear for Carly drowned out caution. She shoved the door open. Inside was a narrow staircase, steep and metallic, smelling of rust and sea spray. Somewhere below, she heard footsteps, not hurried, deliberate, calm. Her legs trembled as she descended. The air grew colder, damp with salt, until she emerged onto a deserted maintenance deck. Moonlight spilled in through small portholes, silvering the room in an eerie glow. And there, at the far end, stood the man in gray. Only now, Carly was with him. Her friend stood rigid, eyes glassy, lips parted as if in a trance. The man's pale hand hovered just behind her shoulder, though he never touched her. Jessica's voice cracked. "Let her go!" The man tilted his head slowly, as though considering the request. His face came into full view, and Jessica's stomach lurched. His features were weather-beaten, skin grayish like stone, but it was his eyes that chilled her. They weren't alive. They were flat, endless, like the ocean at midnight. Finally, he spoke. His voice was a rasp, carried by the sea itself. "She looks like her. That's why she must stay." Jessica's throat tightened. "Like who?" The man's expression twisted, grief and rage woven together. "The one I lost. The one they took from me. She went over the railing, and no one ever looked for her." Carly let out a low moan, her body swaying as though she were about to collapse into his grasp. Jessica's fight instinct surged. "She's not yours," she snapped, forcing her voice steady. "She's real. She's alive, and I'm taking her back." The man's gaze sharpened. The whisper returned, louder now, echoing in Jessica's skull. "Come closer." Jessica's pulse thundered in her ears as the whisper clawed at her thoughts. Carly's eyes were vacant, her body swaying like a puppet on invisible strings. The man in gray stepped closer, and with each slow movement the temperature dropped, frosting the edges of the portholes. Jessica forced herself forward. "You don't want her. You want peace," she said, trying to sound firm though her voice quivered. "Holding on to her won't bring your wife back." The man's expression flickered. Sorrow etched into the cracks of his weathered face. "She was taken by the sea," he murmured, almost to himself. "They said I was mad, but I saw her fall. I heard her scream." His fingers hovered near Carly's hair, trembling. Jessica lunged, grabbing Carly's arm and yanking her back. For a heartbeat, she thought she had her, but then Carly shrieked, a sound that didn't belong to her, guttural and raw. She wrenched free as if pulled by invisible chains. The man's hollow eyes locked on Jessica. "If she leaves, I am alone again." Jessica swallowed the rising terror. "You already are," she whispered, "and you've been alone for a long time." For the first time, the phantom faltered. His shoulders sagged, and the cold seemed to ease. But then, as if afraid of fading, he roared, a sound like a storm tearing through steel. Lights above them exploded, showering sparks. Carly screamed again, her body trembling violently. Jessica did the only thing she could. She reached for Carly, wrapping her arms tight around her friend. "You're real. You're here. Don't let him take you," she cried into Carly's ear. The man lunged, his figure unraveling like smoke and sea mist. For a split second, his hand brushed Carly's shoulder, and then his shape scattered, torn apart by an unseen current. His whisper echoed one last time. "She looks like her," and faded into silence. Carly collapsed in Jessica's arms. The cold lifted. The air returned. And for the first time, Jessica realized how close they'd been to vanishing into a story no one would ever believe. They staggered up the staircase, leaving the empty maintenance deck behind. By the time they emerged onto the passenger hall, everything was bright, bustling, normal, as if nothing had ever happened. Carly, pale and shaking, finally whispered, "Jess, I saw the ocean calling me. I almost went." Jessica's throat tightened. She looked back down the corridor toward the door they had left open. But it was gone. Just smooth, white wall where the entrance had been. The cruise returned to Miami 3 days later, and for most passengers, it had been a dream vacation. Laughter, dancing, clinking glasses of champagne, it all looked perfect on the outside. But Jessica and Carly carried something with them that no one else could see. The moment they stepped back onto solid ground, Carly breathed like someone who'd been drowning. "It's over," she whispered, gripping Jessica's hand. "It has to be." Jessica wanted to believe her. She wanted to bury the memory of the man in gray, of that whisper twisting inside their skulls. But reality has a cruel way of following you. 2 weeks later, Jessica was unpacking groceries when her phone buzzed. A text from Carly. Just 2 words, "He's back." Her stomach dropped. She called immediately, but Carly's line rang and rang before sending her to voicemail. Jessica didn't wait. She drove across town, her heart pounding harder with every turn. Carly's apartment was quiet. Too quiet. Jessica knocked. No answer. She pushed the door open. It wasn't locked. Inside, the air was cold, unnaturally so. The windows were shut, but curtains swayed as though a draft had slipped through. On the kitchen counter sat a single glass of water, untouched, and on the table beside it, a folded piece of paper. Jessica's trembling fingers unfolded it. 3 words, scrawled in a hand she didn't recognize. "She looks like her." Jessica dropped the note as if it burned her. Her eyes darted across the apartment. "Carly!" she shouted. Silence. And then, faintly, from the back room, a whisper. Low. Familiar. It made every hair on her body stand straight. She turned, her breath catching. The door to Carly's bedroom creaked open on its own. Darkness waited inside. And that was when Jessica realized the ship hadn't kept the phantom. He had followed them home. Because sometimes what haunts the sea doesn't drown there. It waits for someone else to carry it to shore. Story 6. The sea wasn't the first thing I saw. The cruise ship's sparkling lights and the cheerful people waving their drinks on deck weren't the cause. The man in cabin 412 was the one. The man who shouldn't have been there nonetheless. You see, I'm Evan, age 33. For years, I had been saving for this trip, which would take me 2 weeks around the Caribbean and provide a much-needed respite from my dreary job in Boston. I needed sunshine badly, I was restless, and I was single. Right up until the first night, nothing about this vacation shouted horror. I was looking around the higher decks of the ship when I saw something strange on the floor plan that was displayed next to the elevators. Cabin 412. The issue? I was in room 410. Additionally, Rick, the person I had previously met, was in 414. Between us, there wasn't meant to be a 412. I recalled passing by. It was just a section of wall with no entrance. But there it was, on the lit map. Cabin 412. And I promise you that it was there now when I walked back down the corridor with my heart pounding, a door when none had previously existed. I froze in the hallway as I saw the dark wood and the precisely straight brass numbers that read 412. I wanted to think I was jet-lagged and exhausted. Perhaps I hadn't been listening before. The doorknob, however, wiggled as I gazed, slowly, as if someone was attempting it from within. I went out, quick. This is where things get worse, though. I talked to a woman next to me in the long buffet queue at breakfast the following morning. When I introduced myself and mentioned that she was sleeping in cabin 412, she gave me a courteous grin. As I waited for her to rectify herself, I laughed uneasily. She didn't. She leaned in close, practically whispering, when I asked her what deck it was on. "You'll notice it." Before I could say another thing, she took her dish and left. "When it wants you to." I couldn't take my eyes off the corridor outside my cabin for the remainder of the day. Most of the time, only smooth walls were there. However, on 1 or 2 occasions, I believed I caught a glimpse of a door's faint outline, light scratches on the carpet, as though 1,000 heavy footfall had walked in and departed. I heard it at about 2 in the morning that night. Knocking. Not at my door, not at Rick's. Between us on the wall. 4 slow knocks. A pause. Then 4 more. As if something was attempting to escape from the walls. I touched the paneling with my ear. And I swear, I could hear breathing as clearly as day. I didn't get any more sleep that night. I vowed I could hear it again every time I closed my eyes. The scrape of something moving inside, the faint pull of breath behind the wall. I was worn out by daylight, and the cheerful rejoicing of the ship's morning announcements seemed phony, almost derisive. During breakfast, Rick, my neighbor in 414, observed that I was pale. He was a gregarious man who quickly made friends and was constantly laughing too loudly. "Dude, you look like hell," he added, giving me a pat on the back. "Too wild for the first night?" After hesitating, I told him. "The door, the raps, the individual claiming to reside in 412. He scowled. "No, dude, that isn't possible. I frequently stroll down that hallway. No door there," he said, leaning in and speaking more softly. However, I believed I heard something last night as well. Knocking. I shook my head, thinking it was you playing about. His grin wavered. With mid-afternoon, I was consumed with curiosity. I went back down the hallway by myself, with the sun shining through the portholes. Everything seemed normal and safe. Naturally, there was only a flat white wall in place of 412. It was stress, I told myself. My brain is playing tricks. Then I ran into her again at supper. The breakfast woman. With an untouched plate in front of her, she was seated by herself at a corner table. When I got close, her pallid face turned up. "Cabin 412, I murmured. "Where is it?" A peculiar smile flickered across her lips. "It doesn't remain motionless," she said. I was chilly all over. "But it always finds the ones who notice." By finds. "Do you mean?" She didn't respond, just threw her dish aside, got to her feet, and left the dining room without saying anything more. I woke up to a quiet sound at around 1 in the morning that night. Click. The unlatching of a door. With my heart pounding, I sat up. And there it was. I'm directly across the hall. Cabin 412. In the faint emergency lights, the brass numbers shone. The door appeared to be waiting for me, half open and dark inside. My name came in a whisper from the darkness. Evan. My immediate reaction was to hide under the covers, slam the door of my cabin, and act as though I hadn't noticed it. Act as though I hadn't heard my name called out in the shadows. However, I was unable to. There shouldn't be a door. Not the night before, not this morning. Nevertheless, there it was, waiting, open, and secretly breathing my name. The flooring was cold when I walked barefoot into the hallway. All the lights appeared to be dimmed, flickering with a slight hum. I fixed my gaze on the metal numerals. 412. The door creaked a little as though a draft had agitated it. The air was still, though. "Evan!" The voice returned, gentle, enticing, and all too familiar. I took a deep breath and edged closer. I reached out and brushed the wood with trembling fingers. Like a fevered body, the surface was warmer than it should have been. The whisper ceased as soon as I touched it. Silence closed in. Then there were footsteps. From inside. Slow. Heavy. Pacing in both directions. With my heart racing, I stumbled back. I wanted to knock on Rick's door and rouse him up so he could see it too. But I froze when I looked over my shoulder. Every single door down the hall had vanished. 410. Number 414. No, not a single cabin. Just a white wall that goes on forever in both directions. 412 was the only door remaining. The sound of footsteps ceased. The quiet was intolerable. Then a hand slipped into view from the gap in the open door. Pale. Long fingers. Dark and damaged nails. With a steady creak, it pushed it wider as it coiled around the edge. With my chest heaving, I staggered back into the wall on the other side. The person who emerged wasn't an unfamiliar face. It was me. The same face. Identical attire. The same wide eyes were staring back at me with a hollow, twisted look. His teeth glinted in the half-light as his lips stretched too wide in a smile. My own voice whispered, "I told you, this is your room." I gazed at him, at May, until my throat dried up. The doppelganger leaned against the doorway as if he had been waiting for this very time and should have been there. Even as I muttered, "What? What are you?" His smile remained unwavering. His head was inclined. I always made the same motion when I was perplexed. The jaw twitches the same way. The same squint of anxiety in the eyes. However, there was a roughness in his voice, as if there were echoes of something hollow within it. He whispered, "I'm what the ship gave you. A location, a space. You belong here, a version of yourself." The hallway lights flickered, buzzing like irate wasps. As they calmed, I became aware of something I had never seen before. He didn't quite wear the same clothes. He was wearing an older version of the same gray t-shirt that I was wearing. Torn, with dark spots that resembled dried blood too much. I braced myself against the wall as he moved forward. The corridor narrowed as if the walls themselves leaned in, and the room seemed to contract about me. I said in a whisper, "I don't belong here." Unnaturally, his smile stretched till the corners of his mouth almost broke. "You already do." He sprang forward. My heart smashed as I staggered sideways, but when I blinked, I realized I was no longer in the corridor. I was in cabin 412. Behind me, the door banged. The air pressed on my lungs, heavy and thick. The space was far larger than it ought to have been. The walls curved oddly, as if they were the interior of a huge hollow, and the ceiling extended far above. The room was lined with rows of bunks, each with a human laying still under a thin blanket, the metal frames heaped to the ceiling. There are hundreds of them. I stumbled back, lightheaded. The faint buzz of the ship's engines deep below was the only sound to break the oppressive silence in that room. I grabbed the door. No handle. Just seamless. silky wood. One of the figures then sat up. A man, gaunt and pale, with unfocused, cloudy-looking eyes. His lips moved as he gently turned to face me. "One more," he muttered. The ship took another one. More folks sat up before I could reply. Bunk after bunk, one by one. Men, ladies. Some are youthful, while others are elderly. They all had the same thin voices and sunken eyes. One whispered, "Once you're here, you don't leave." Another person wrote, "The door opens only to bring more." "You shouldn't have noticed," said a woman with tangled hair, who leaned forward from her bunk and stared at me. I spun as I heard my doppelganger say, "He noticed," from behind me. Once more he stood in the middle of the room, smiling like a predator, and all of those passengers with the hollowed-out pale eyes whispered to each other, their voices blending into a single, icy chorus. "Welcome to 412. Despite the fact that every eye in that unattainable room was on me, the air in cabin 412 tasted stale, like dust that hadn't been moved in years. There are hundreds of them. Their bodies moved like shadows, their pale features glinting in the twilight. With my heart thumping in my ears, I staggered backward. "This isn't real," I told myself in a whisper. The room responded, "This can't be real." With a voice as dry as paper, a man whispered from the higher bunk, "It's realer than anything outside." As I shook my head and pressed my hands against the door, looking for any seam or handle, I said, "That ship, the one you thought you boarded, isn't yours anymore. Easy, seamless. The single exit has been swallowed by the door." Behind me, I could hear my doppelganger laughing. It sounded too jagged and piercing, as if it were coming from deep within the walls rather than his throat. He gently circled me and stated, "You don't understand yet." I whirled around on him and yelled, "But you will. What is this? Who are they?" He gestured at the bunks, his pale hand sweeping over the hollow-eyed passengers. Them? It was they who took notice. Those that are interested. Those who pursued a sound they shouldn't have heard, or who gazed at a map for too long. Curiosity is rewarded by the ship. The audience awoke, whispers weaving together like the sound of waves hitting steel. Always here. Never leave. Endless voyage. No, I shook my head and gasped. That isn't feasible. I was only in the corridor. Rick lives next door. I choked on the name. Rick, my neighbor, the man in 414. Desperately, I turned and looked around the bunks, and there he was, occupying a lower bunk. The head was bent, shaking shoulders. I croaked. "Rick!" He raised his head. My gut churned. His lips were quivering, his eyes were hollow pits, and his face was gray. "I made an effort to inform you," he muttered. "I made an effort to ignore it, but when it wants you, it always finds you." I stumbled back, my heart clenched with fear. "No, you were simply outdoors?" My doppelganger gave a gloomy laugh. "That wasn't Rick." "No more." The whispers grew and overlapped until they created a deep, droning chant, similar to how you won't be you for very long. I heard words that shook my bones but that I couldn't make out. I put my hands to my ears, but it made no difference. I heard the sound inside of me. More figures sat up, and the bunks creaked. Some moved closer, stood shakily, swinging their legs over. The smell of wetness filled the air, making it smell like a chamber that had been submerged in water for a long time. I took a step back till my shoulders struck the wall. His smile was tough to contain as I took a double step closer. "Leaving is not an option," he muttered. "Not for me, not for them." I tried to scream, but the sound died in my throat. "Not for you," as a result of the wall behind me breathing. Slow, deep, as if the whole cabin were alive. And I was being drawn in by it. With panic brewing in my chest, I banged my fists on the wall. It was no longer metal, instead it was supple and soft, as though I were hitting muscle beneath the skin. A dull vibration rippled through the room with each blow, and the chorus of whispers became louder. They chanted, "There is no way out. There's no turning back. You belong." I stumbled away from the wall, heaving in my chest. Head cocked as if pleased at my desperation, my duplicate regarded me with that terrible smile. Then, however, something changed. The light flickered. I could make out a faint silhouette of it there, above one of the bunks. A rectangle that gave off a faint glimmer that suggested a door. My heart twitched. I ran toward it without thinking, pushing past the hollow-eyed forms that trembled as they reached for me. Even if their icy fingers touched my arms, I continued. Evan Rick's words reverberated, unfiltered and fractured. "Don't," I said, ignoring him. For a horrifying moment, the luminous outline felt solid as I threw myself at it. Uncompromising. Then it gave way. I fell through and landed on the carpeted floor. The ship's buzz reappeared, the distant throb of music from the upper decks, the muted sound of engines. I dragged myself to my feet, gasping. I had returned to the corridor. There was no cabin 412. Where it had been, there was nothing but a blank wall. With my eyes hurting from weeping, I pressed my palms against it. Firm, cool, typical. The numbers on the other doors shone steadily, but the lights in the corridor flickered dimly overhead. 410. 414. Typical. I briefly considered the possibility that I had all of this in my head. A hallucination, a nightmare, or something else caused by excessive paranoia and insufficient sleep. I then glanced down. I didn't have empty hands. I had a cabin keycard in my fist. The corridor appeared to slant under me. It was brass-colored, heavier than usual, and had the number 412 inscribed deep into it. Stumbling back toward my cabin, I stuffed the card into my pocket. I leaned against the door when I finally closed it behind me, shivering so violently that I felt like my bones may break. That night, I hardly slept at all, and I ventured to hope it was ended when daylight arrived. The smell of breakfast was typical. Over Placid Lake, the sun shone. The crew gave a kind grin as if nothing was amiss. However, a folded piece of paper was waiting on the bed when I got back to my cabin, my name, nicely written on the exterior. My fingers were trembling as I opened it. Inside, it said, "Your room is ready," in crisp block letters, 412. And I heard the door creak open from the hallway, very softly, yet definitely. The note shuddered in my grasp. My initial reaction was to tear it up, throw the fragments around, and act as though it didn't exist. But, "Your room is ready." 412 was already ingrained in my mind, so I pushed the slip beneath my pillow and tried to tell myself I could ignore it. Act as though it doesn't exist. Then the knock came. My cabin door was rapped 3 times. Every muscle in my body tensed as I froze. I turned slowly in the direction of the door. One more knock. More volume. I compelled myself to go a step closer and look through the peephole. The corridor was deserted. There is nobody there. However, the door handle shook wildly, as though someone outside was twisting it. I stumbled back, holding onto the key card like a lifeline in my pocket. There was no more rattling, quiet. Then, so faint that it may have been the air itself, a murmur crept through the door's crevices. "Come home." After that, I didn't sleep at all. The slip of paper was gone before dawn. Smooth and undisturbed, the pillow looked as though it had never been there. However, the keycard was still in my pocket when I checked it. Heavy. Chilly. My fingertips are burning with the number 412. I required clarification. Despite my trembling voice, I tried to seem casual as I strode to the reception counter. "Hey, I believe there was a mistake. Look, my keycard says 412, but that can't be correct. Would you please check?" A young man with well-groomed hair and an overly ideal grin. The receptionist took a quick look at the card. His eyes flicked up at me with a look of panic, and his smile wavered for a half-second. He swiftly slid the card back across the counter and muttered, "I'm sorry, sir. This cabin does not exist." "But the number is right here," I yelled. "Take a look." His mouth clenched. His tone became harder and lower. "For your own sake, sir, Don't remember that number. Can you comprehend me? Forget it. A second crew member touched the receptionist's shoulder before I could ask more questions. A hushed, heavy glance passed between them. The second crewman then leaned in my direction and said, "You won't be able to forget if it found you," in a whisper. The receptionist went pale. "No one does." "Enough of that," he growled. However, I heard it, as clear as day. Desperate to feel safe, I pushed furniture against the door and shut myself in my cabin that night. Hours went by. It was midnight. All around me, the ship buzzed and creaked, but nothing happened. I chuckled shakily, fairly certain that it was finally ended. That is, until I looked in the mirror. I had lost my reflection. Another face peered out from the glass as it glistened, rippling like water. My face. Grinning, he raised a hand and held up a key card made of brass. My card, 412, shone more brilliantly than before. The mirror broke as he said, "Time to come back," in a voice that was distorted and overlaid with echoes, and my door, in spite of the blockade, opened gently. The mirror splintered into sharp fragments that spiderwebbed across the glass as it split wider. As the fissures spread, my double's eyes sank into dark voids as his smile grew wider. Then, as if it were opening rather than cracking, the mirror's surface folded inward, with a sound like to bones fracturing. Pale and incorrect, the reflection's hand sprang through, reaching for me. My shoulder hit the dresser as I staggered back. For a moment, I felt the hand brush across my arm, cold and damp, like seawater gushing directly into my veins. The barred door opened all the way. The hallway was no longer the hallway beyond it. All the cabin numbers were warped and stretched till they read 412 on every door, each wall. Dim yellow light surged along the corridor as if there were veins beneath the steel of the ship itself, and I heard the creak of bunks behind each door, the murmur of voices. "Always here," they chanted in unison, hundreds of them. "Don't ever leave. Always present. Never go." My chest constricted. I ran past the doors and into the corridor. 412, 412, 412. The figures remained the same no matter how far I ran. Beneath me, the corridor wound in a never-ending spiral. Then, I caught sight of them. The travelers. They emerged from the cabins in dozens, their eyes vacant, their cheeks gaunt and limp. Among them is my neighbor Rick, the elderly lady at the buffet. I had seen people on the pool deck and in the dining hall. Everything is gone. They moved their jaws in perfect harmony. The walls pulsed once again as they said, "Welcome home." Beneath my feet, the floor buckled like waves. The key card fell out of my pocket as I staggered and fell to my knees. It clattered against the floor, sinking rather than skidding, right down, pulling the carpet under as though it were liquid. The chanting intensified. The people moved forward, reaching for me with their raised arms. With my lungs burning, I hauled myself up and clutched the dresser. "This is not true," I yelled. "This isn't possible." The air then changed, though, deeper than an engine. A low moan echoed through the ship. The walls breathed as they swelled inward. The whole ship was alive. It also desired me. I shuddered and retreated till my shoulders struck a door. My door! 412. The handle turned on its own. Inward, the door swung, and I recognized myself within. One more Evan. Head lowered, he sat on the lower bunk and repeatedly whispered, "You shouldn't have looked. You ought not to have paid attention." I shook my head angrily, saying, "You shouldn't have noticed." No, I'm not." However, the other version of himself looked up. He had empty eyes. That same unnatural grin twisted his lips. The passengers rushed forward, pushing me through the door as he muttered, "It's too late," in my own voice, overlaid with 100 echoes. The cabin engulfed me. The voices grew louder, and the bunks creaked. When I tell you this story, and tell you not to look for it, I want you to keep in mind that cabin 412 doesn't exist unless you know it does. That was the last thing I saw before the door slammed shut. The number on the outside, glowing brighter than ever, was 412, and you do now.